Welcome to part 2 of chapter 5. Here we're going to look at some more Greek art. We're going to get into Greece. So here's a map of Greece. What's so great about this? I'm sure you've had some idea of how great Greek culture is. It was one of the very first very first cultures that was studied as in the discipline of art history. So there's a lot of information about this, a lot of vocabulary, and a lot of artwork. So it's kind of small. We've already been here with the Aegean cultures. But this really represents Greece. Greece was small geographically, but they sent out traders and explorers to different parts of the known world and set up trading posts and little settlements all over. So this is called the Greater Greece, or Magna Graeca. And we have down in Spain, southern France, northern Africa, all around Asia Minor here. So just don't forget that as we look at this. I want to also point out, because it's going to come up in our next unit, that the shoe part of the boot of Italy is Greek. It was a Greek settlement, as was Sicily. So there's a lot of Greek stuff going on. And this means that they come in contact with a lot of un-Greek people, trading, etc., etc. Now, unlike the other cultures we've looked at, Greek culture is so rich and so full of stuff that we have to break it down into little chunks, into little manageable chunks. And it also progresses really rapidly. And this is in stark contrast to the Egyptian culture. So we're going to start off looking at what's called the geometric period. And we're going to follow this progress until the Hellenistic period. So that's a period of about 600 years, and you're just going to see huge change within that time. Don't over concern yourself with the dates. Just I want you to see the flow and the change, and it is pretty rapid, especially in terms of what other cultures were doing. So here you go. This is a useful slide, so that's why I'm sort of stopping here. Pericles was a ruler of Greece, of Athens, so I'll mention him a little bit later. So we're going to move through these styles and these periods. I will tell you what you will need to get for the quiz. So this first period is the geometric, and you will need to identify this vase as coming from the geometric period. So let's just look back briefly. After the Mycenaeans, Greece had been invaded from the north. Greece was invaded from the north, and there were 2 centuries of an intermediate period. And this is where the civilization sort of takes root and builds its cities and defines where its temples to its gods are, who their gods are. So by the time the geometric period comes around, it's like that has kind of been settled. So in the geometric period, we have our first temples, which are rectangular with round ends. I'm not even going to show you any of those. And sanctuaries get dedicated. So we have one piece from the geometric, and I hope you're going to understand why it's called the geometric period. So this is a very large vase. It was found in a cemetery. And you notice right from the start that it's got several bands of decoration, or registers. So we have 2 inhabited ones here, meaning that there are figures drawn in them. And the other bands are geometric patterns. They're just designs. So that is one situation where the word geometric is applied, just the decorations that are used. Greek key patterns, zigzags, checkerboard, you name it, it's all there. And the second is that human beings have been so stylized that their forms more closely resemble geometric shapes rather than an organic human body. So this Diplon vase is really large. It's just under 4 feet tall. It was used as a grave marker. It held offerings. The registers we've already discussed, and we're going to look at some figures. And we have there's the vase again, and a detail of one of the decorated bands is here. So this represents the story of a funeral, at least the top band does. And so I'm going to explain it to you. We have lying on this table, this rather high table, a body which we can assume is the dead person. Seated on a chair to the left is a figure, probably a woman, with a little child on its lap, and standing over here is another figure. Underneath the table there are two animals that could be sheep or goats. Now look at how the human figure has been abbreviated, has been turned into this sort of abstract shape, where the top part of their body is just simply a triangle. That's the other application of geometric. Okay, so I hope you get that. I think the lower register is also interesting. You can see these forms over here. That is a shield that was used by a hoplite soldier, and the shield has become the body of these figures. So apparently they were soldiers, and that was the most important thing about them. And then a chariot here with overlapping horses and just multiple legs just shown abbreviated as straight lines. So very stylized drawings of all the creatures, all the people and the animals. The next period, so that's the only piece you need to know from geometric. The next period is called the Archaic Period. And this dates from 600 to 480. So it's not super long, all BCE, of course. So this is a very important period in Greek art where a lot of their styles, a lot of their traditions and their trends start out. You can't say that anything like the geometric figures is going to continue, but stuff started here will continue. So here's your first temple, first Greek temple in the state of ruins, of course. This is the temple of Apphia at Aegina. And it also illustrates one of the three Greek orders, and that is Doric, so that's why I've labeled that there. We're going to talk more about that. But I want you to notice as we're looking at this temple that a Doric column is fluted, meaning it has these grooves that extend the full height of the column. It has no base, so the column it cuts off and ends at the bottom. It has a very simple top, the capital there. Another aspect of Doric is this rhythm that is created across the top called triglyph and metope, but you don't need to know that. But if you ever see this rhythm on a temple, you should know it is Doric. But I always encourage students, just look at the column. So here's a reconstruction of what it would have looked like. So pretty interesting. And we're going to do a deep dive up in the upper register. So above the triglyphs and metopes, you can see this squished triangle. This is, of course, what happens when you pitch a roof and you end up with a space here. So the Greeks, before this, started putting sculptures in those spaces. And this is one that we're going to pause and look at in detail because these figures are pretty interesting. So first of all, as we're looking at this whole thing from this drawing, you can see human figures. And in the old style pedimental sculptures, they would just make shorter figures going down into these squished areas. But in this temple, they started keeping all of the figures in the same scale and making them squat or lie down on the ground in order to fit into those spaces. So that's different. It creates more of a holistic scene in the pediment that we haven't seen before. So here's a plan showing the location of that temple at Apphia. And you can see it's walled in. This was considered the residence of the deity who was honored in the temple. And this was his or her home. There would be one entry point. The temple was really important. All these little dots represent columns, so this is completely surrounded or peristyle temple. And then there's exterior to the temple is the altar, where it would have been a big stone like table, and people bringing offerings to the deity would, or they'd give it to a priest. The priest would place it on the altar and burn it as an offering to the deity. So over here's where the priest would stay. There's also different artwork that collected in these temple precincts, but you're going to see some of that a little bit later. So here's a nice diagram showing you the three Greek orders. So the one we just looked at Aphaia was the Doric order, and I described the parts that you needed to be aware of. That is no base and a very simple capital, and then this triglyph and metope. I also, at this point, will point out there's a lot more vocabulary going on here that you do not have to worry about. The ones you need to know are Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, and you need to be able to identify these by sight. So that's why we go over these. So the Ionic order has these little curlicues called volutes for a capital, and there is a base. If you look at the proportions of the column, also it's thinner, slightly more delicate than the Doric. And there's none of that triglyph metope rhythm. So it's one continuous frieze up there. The last order is Corinthian, which is even thinner. And the capital in this case is very elaborate. It looks like a bunch of leaves sort of sprouting out of the top. So it gives it a more decorative look. And the bottom has a base as well. So I hope you can get these three. They'll show up on the quiz. And like I said, you will need to identify them by sight and not in this order. They will not appear in this order. Now, let's look at those sculptures from Aphaia. Up at the top, we have the remnants of what was originally there. So, again, as I pointed out, you can see that they were all done in more or less the same scale, but down in the narrower parts of the pediment, they squat or recline. And then we're going to look at several of the figures in detail. So we're looking at this little guy here. So this is done in the archaic style of sculpture, which I hope you're going to get. So we're going to see quite a bit of this, actually. So he's archaic. The archaic features are mostly easily identified around the face. So look for eyes that are slightly bulging out, and then a very fake looking smile and long hair. So there's a period style of this dressed curled hair, beardless face, and long hair and back. So now look at what he's doing. He's pulling an arrow out of his body, and yet the man smiles. So he's going to smile no matter what. That's one of the attributes of archaic sculpture. Notice all the details of his body, too. So there's a lot of attention to that, of the carving of muscles, of the observing of muscles. Greek culture loved their nude males, as you will see, and they thought that the body of the nude male was very beautiful, so they will never shy away from depicting a nude male. It's great, great beauty. From the other pediment, and this is from the first one was from the west pediment, and the lower figure here is from the east pediment, slightly later. So the guy below shows a slightly more advanced style. He's still squished in the same way into the corner of that, but there's a little bit more naturalism. I think the knee and the calf here are particularly lovely. Too bad he's got a helmet on, or we could also observe his archaic face, but there you go. And another one of the figures from Aphaya is the archer. He's great also. And I like to include this just because I have this figure of a reconstructed polychrome version of him. So a lot of scholars agree, I think it's the majority, believe that all of these figures were originally painted in bright colors. So they're not just the way we see them today as this bare white marble, that look that we associate with the ancient world, but in fact they would have been something a little gaudier looking, something closer to a mannequin in a department store, painted to look real. So here's the archer wearing really, really cool leggings and shirt, beautiful helmet. So it's great. So just think about that. So here's another typical nude male that is seen many, many times in archaic Greek art. And this is called a Koros. The plural of Koros is koroi, although I don't think you will need to know that. And a girl is a kore. So it gets a little confusing, but this is a Koros. So he's archaic. You can tell that right off. He has the bulging eyes, the long dressed hair, and that little fake smile. He was found in a cemetery at Navasas near Athens. He dates from around 530 BCE. I'm going to keep bringing him back because we're going to sort of see him as our representative baseline of where figure style starts in Greece. So there also were remnants of paint on his body. He was 6'4". Who is he? Most people believe that the Koroi were athletes. So I told you that the Greek loved their nude males, but they also really loved their athletes. And their athletes are all men. They had athletic games. They invented the Olympics. They invented so many of those events in the Olympics. And when the athletes competed, they competed in the nude. And they believed that a victorious athlete was the closest thing to a god. Like they could see a man running faster than any other man, or lifting more weights than any other man. This to them raised him above everybody else and got him closer to being godlike. They didn't call him a god. They just thought he resembled a god. Yes, you can see his archaic smile there. Let's look ahead. And this, I'm sure you were thinking this, that as you saw him, you remembered our Egyptian king. This was our late New Kingdom king who was standing alone. Look at those positions, the arms at their side, the weight balanced on two legs, the left leg stepping out slightly in front of the right leg. Is this a coincidence? I don't think so. They're not too far apart in time, and we've seen how the Greeks had settlements in North Africa. I think it's quite possible that there is contact and influence. I'm not going to say which way it went, but probably from Egypt to Greece. So here's a figure of a woman. This is our first female from Greek culture. And this is called the Peplos Kore. She's called a Peplos Kore because she's wearing a dress that is in a style called a Peplos. You can also see the polychrome on her. And you noticed that she's clothed in her Peplos, and the male was shown nude. And this is because Greek culture is very much male-dominated, and women are secondary citizens, second-class citizens. They are mostly kept at home. Some of them serve as priestesses in temples, but for the most part, they're not seen in public. If they're in a good family, they would be kept inside and not public at all. So look at her. Look at her bulging eyes and her little fake smile and her long dressed hair. This is an archaic woman. So I also want you to notice her, the contours of her body. Look at her skirt, for example. There's almost no indication that there's a human body or human hips under there. There's no slight bump in the knee area. So her skirt, for all intents and purposes, looks more like a column than it does the covering of a body. Sorry, I'm going to have to cough. Too phlegmy today. Now, to get back to Greek vase painting, we have seen one vase. It was geometric. It's completely different from this. In the Archaic period, a style of vase painting arose called black figure. I will expect you to remember that this is called black figure. It is not highly technical, so all you have to do is see that they're black. It's a black figure. This is Ajax and Achilles with a board game, and they're playing a game. This story comes from the Trojan War. So notice how all the decoration now is reduced to one band right around the shoulder of the vase, and the other bands are left, or the rest of the vase is left just solid black. And this is an amphora, so it has handles on either side. I really love black figure, so I'm showing you this detail so you can see some of the things going on here. So black figure was created by painting a black slip or really, really thin black clay over red clay body of the vase. That was the natural color of clay. And they would paint the black on it, and then they would scrape off everything that they didn't want. So they would contour these legs. And I mean, look at the size of his thigh and then his calf. And it goes down to this tiny, tiny little foot. That is part of the style of black figure that I just love. It's so stylized and so lovely. His cape here is also incised with lots of patterns that have been carefully scraped into it by the artist, Exekias. We know who these figures are because their names have been written around their faces. So if you look closely, you can see little black writing here, 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 and here. This is what they're saying as they're playing their game. And this is the armor belonging to this guy. So look also at the device the artist is using to focus our attention on one spot, which is the game. He's put the spears here to bring our eye down there. The hands of both of these men are brought to the same place, and they're both gazing down here. So this is obviously really important. This is where he wants us to focus our mental attention, because our visual attention, sorry to say, will be frustrated. We cannot see the game, but we know what they're playing. So beautiful black figure. Again, know that that's black figure. This is not black figure. This is called red figure, and I want you to know that because it is the color of the red clay, and you have to just sort of use red in quotes and think about the clay in Charlotte or the red soil in Charlotte. It's not really red, but compared to black, it is. So we're calling this red figure. This is the death of Sarpedon. The artist is Euphronius. You don't need to know the names of these artists, but it shows a warrior who died on the battlefield here, Sarpedon, and he's being removed by from the battlefield by these two deities that are Hypnos and Thanatos. They are the gods of sleep and death. And behind him, sort of watching over, is Hermes, and he's holding his caduceus here. He has wings on his helmet. So it illustrates figures that are very prominent from mythology. Also, the artist wants us to be sure to see the many wounds on the body. So he has tipped the body on its side, shown the wounds, shown the incredible six-pack on the abdomen of Sarpedon, and shown blood streaming from it in a contrasting color, a more red, actually. So it's loaded with details. That's why it's a very famous vase, because it's very well done, very well painted. Now, we're moving, that was all archaic, and we're moving to the classical period, which is sort of the high point of Greek art. We're going to see so much being created there. Artists have a cherished place in society. It's amazing. So Greek had been attacked by Persians and had driven the Persians out by 479 BCE. And that inaugurates the classical period. The big ideas of the classical period are that Athens had a great political and naval power, which brought wealth to finance the art and building of Athens. And circumstances combined to produce outstanding geniuses in all the arts. Artists were trained specialists. They were honored. They had a high place in society. I think you saw the last two vases we looked at even recorded the names of the people who painted them, which raises them above the role of mere craftspeople making something functional and into the role of artist. They believed the arts were inspired by muses, who were sisters, who were semi-divine or divine. The part of their mythology was that there were these women who would inspire artists. And they would choose who to inspire. Not everybody was equally inspired. It's also the age of Sophocles and humanism, where the Greeks believed that humans are the measure for all things. The Greek gods are personified by human ideals. This is quite different from the ancient Near East or Egypt. The Greeks believed that there were civic responsibilities for all people, including gifted people, including artists. The arts reflect a tension between conservatism and individualism, as you will see. The forces of nature were personified, meaning seas and woodlands and winds even are all turned into people in their artwork. Art was intended to create a poetic image of a real world, and artists could take artistic license. It was also mimesis, or copying of nature. The Greeks were very much at home in the world. They were not overly otherworldly or spiritual. They did not say, well, whatever happens here is okay because I'm going to spend my life in eternity, or I'm going to go there soon. No, it was all the here and now. If you have read the Odyssey, you saw where Odysseus visited the underworld, and it was not really a very good place. It was no paradise. It wasn't like a reward for good behavior at all. It was kind of dreary. Athletics were stressed, especially for males. I've already told you that. And the Greek ideals were courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom. Some archaic elements in the artwork persist. So now we're starting to look at this. I hope if you didn't, that you paused my narration so you could read this all these words over here. So the archaic style elements that persist is the simplification of forms, the return to plain Doric garments and simple drapery, new subjects showing motion before or after movement, or emotion or trying to. So this is Critias' boy. He dates from 480, right about the beginning of the classical period. And we look at him, and he is saved, and he is used in every single lecture because He represents sort of a missing link between the archaic figures and what's about to happen in the classical period. So, first of all, we're going to notice some differences. One is that his hair is short. He still has the archaic smile. His eyes have been treated differently. He had an inset eye, probably of some stone or a seashell, that would have made him look a little more naturalistic. And his body is carved slightly softer, slightly more naturalistic. And the most important thing of all is he's not balancing his weight on two legs, but he has all of his weight on his left leg, and his right leg was swinging free. This is called contrapposto. So the words over here, you're going to need that for the quiz as well. Now, I'm going to look at him in comparison to the Koros we just looked at. So when I say a missing link, I hope you see similarities, but you also see that he's looking much softer, much more naturalistic in his body. And then, of course, the period style of the different hairstyle is important. But you can look at a Navasas with this sharp edge down his shin, like the Egyptian man. And over here, it's softer, it's more naturalistic. So this is another red figure face that is used here just to illustrate another medium. So this was an illustration on a kylix, which is a drinking vessel, of a bronze foundry. So these men here are working bronze, a new medium. We haven't seen it yet, like I said. So this is the furnace where it would have been heated, bronze would have been melted, and then there's all kinds of work. So you can kind of get a sense of it here. The men closest to the fire are working in the nude. This man seems to have a garment on. This is not a dead body over here. It is a sculpture of a man who's headless at the moment, but the guy's got a hammer. He's working on it. The head is on the floor. We have some extra body parts hanging on the walls and a few tools around. Looks like over here there are some drawings of figures that might have been used for reference. So I love pictures like this that show us how things were made. It gives us a look into their culture, into their arts. This is the kind of figure that was crafted in a bronze workshop in classical Greece. We have two of these. You can see them on the left. They are known as the Archaic warriors because they were on a ship. They were traveling somewhere. They were off the coast of Italy, and the ship wrecked, and they sunk to the bottom, where they stayed until, I believe, till the 20th century, when they were found and brought up and restored. So here's a very early example of some nice bronze sculpture. Now, you're going to notice some similarities to what we've seen in the past with this guy. Let's get him looking close up. First of all, he's standing contrapposto, so his left leg is the free leg. All of his weight is on the right. You can even see straining muscles over here. Unlike all the figures we've seen, this man is heavily bearded, so he has a big, full beard. But there's nothing left, no remnant of the archaic face, I would say here. He's very strong. He does not appear youthful like the Critias boy or the Anavasas, who seems like he might be in his 20s. This man seems mature, possibly in his 30s. So the Archaic warriors are interesting for a lot of reasons. And one is that the artist was really trying very hard to make the figure look as naturalistic as possible. I don't think we know where they were headed, so we don't know what their context would have been had they been placed. But for example, the material, bronze, when it's new, when it's fresh, can be buffed up to a golden color. So his skin would not have been white. It would not have required painting. He would have just kind of looked really bronze, yeah, because it is bronze. Then the artist also wanted greater realism and used contrasting metals for some details. Like the nipples, he made out of copper, so that when they were polished, they would be pinker than the body in general. They would have that contrasting color of copper. And on his head, the lips were also copper, and the teeth were silver. And here you can get a good look at part of the eye. So like I said, it was made of an inset of something. I believe it's shell. I think the one before says what it is. Glass, I'm sorry, bone and glass eyes, and silver teeth, copper lips and nipples. Okay, so bone and glass, and then you see all of his long curly hair. So his hair is long like the archaic figures, but it's not dressed in that same way. It's more of a natural look with this just kind of flowing curls and a headband. And this is how he looks from the rear, so you can get a better sense of what that original color would have been, that sort of golden bronze look. And you can also see how much more muscular he is than some of those other figures we've looked at. Broad in the shoulders. He looks like a working guy. That's why he's called a warrior. But he could also be called, a stone worker, because he would have been strong as well. And here's his friend. So the two were found together. They're very similar. They're similar in their materials. Again, we have the copper and the silver contrast. This guy's hair is completely different. And I did point out on the other warrior that his hand could have been holding or would be holding a spear at the time he was placed somewhere. So there you go. Two Riache warriors. And we have now come to the end of part 2 of chapter 5. So stay tuned. We will continue looking at more classical art in part 3.